Jesus says that whatever we ask him for, if we really believe it's going to happen, he's going to give it to us. Even something as big as telling a mountain to move and to fall into the sea. Wow, that's either true or it's not. And since we know that Jesus can't lie, it has to be true. So wow, the ability to move mountains, whatever we ask, that's a promise worth exploring. And that's exactly what we're going to do today on Truth for Africa. This incredible promise of Jesus is found in Mark chapter 11. And we need to remember that these words are not just disconnected words that God dropped out of the sky. These are words that Jesus spoke to real people living in a real situation. And so if we're going to understand what his words mean for us today, we first have to get a clear idea, what was it that he was communicating to them? Let's start with what was going on. It was almost time for the Passover celebration. We know from the Gospel of John that Jesus had just recently raised Lazarus from the dead, and now he's entering Jerusalem with his disciples, just a few days before he would be arrested and crucified. And as he's coming in, large crowds of people were praising him and proclaiming that he's the Messiah, the promised coming king. But then it says in verse 11 that Jesus went into the temple and looked around at everything. And we know from what he does later in the chapter, when he goes back to the temple the next day, what he saw made him incredibly angry. The temple was meant to be a place where people met God, a place where God was celebrated and adored. But people were using it as a place to make a profit off of all of the travelers who were coming for the Passover celebration. The place of worship had turned into a marketplace. The place that was supposed to be filled with the life of God was now nothing but a place to make money, and it made Jesus angry. That's really important for us to understand to help us to make sense of what happened in the midst of all of this. After Jesus looked around in the temple for the first time, he and his disciples were heading for Bethany, where they were spending the night. And it says Jesus was hungry. He looked up ahead and he saw a fig tree that had really nice, healthy-looking leaves, which meant there should be fruit on it. But when he got to the tree, there was no fruit, and it made him angry. Now, in connection with what he had just seen in the temple, it's clear that this is much more than a guy getting mad because he wanted some figs and he didn't get any. The fig tree should have had fruit, but it didn't. And it reminded Jesus of how the temple should be a place that was bearing fruit, where the life of God was being nurtured in his people. But there was no life there at all. And so the fig tree made him angry because it reminded him of what had become of the people of God. So he curses the fig tree, and he says, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." This was a clear picture of what he says is going to happen to the Jewish religious establishment. In the very next chapter, in the parable of the vine growers, he says that the owner of the vineyard will come and destroy those who are tending his vineyard because they're not giving him the fruit of the vineyard. And so he's going to give the vineyard to others. Well, the next day, when the disciples saw that the fig tree had withered and died, they said, "Wow, Rabbi, look, that fig tree that you cursed is dead." They were amazed at his power. And so Jesus used this as an opportunity to teach them something about the unlimited power of God working through prayer. He says, this isn't the result of some kind of magic power that I have in me. This is the result of the power of my Father, the power of the Spirit working through me. And anyone, he says, who puts their trust in God can have this same kind of power at work in their lives. Anyone. And then he goes on to tell them that they could even tell a mountain to fall into the sea, and it would be done. He says, if you don't doubt, but you really believe it's going to happen, it will be done. Now, a lot of people interpret this to mean that the power then is in our words, in our prayer. If we say it the right way, if we really believe hard that it will happen, then God will give us whatever we want. But they jump over the most important phrase in the whole teaching. He begins by saying, have faith in God. in God. Not have faith in your prayers, not have faith in your words, or not even have faith in your faith, but have faith in God. Listen, this is so important for us to understand, and we need to have, in order to understand this, a comprehensive biblical grasp of what it means to have faith in God. Jesus isn't just saying we should trust in God's power or in God's ability to give us whatever we want. Faith is about trust, and trust is very personal. It means that we not only trust His power, but we trust His heart. We trust His wisdom. A true prayer of faith biblically is a prayer of surrender. We're asking God to do something, but even more than that, we are trusting God Himself to know what is right and to do what is right. And Jesus is making us a wonderful promise here, that when we put our full trust in God, there is no limit to what He can do through our prayers. But the emphasis is on the limitless power of God and our trust in Him, not on our ability to pray powerful prayers or to believe that certain things will happen for us. He's promising that as we walk with God, as we live for Him, as we surrender our hearts and our lives to His purposes, in other words, when we have faith in God, then we can be absolutely certain that God is both able and willing to do whatever is necessary to fully equip us to be His people, people who bear fruit for Him in our lives and through our lives. It doesn't depend on you. That's really good news. It all depends on Him. And Jesus is saying here that we can trust Him completely because there's no limit to His power. There's no limit to His wisdom. There's no limit to His love, and there is no limit to His faithfulness. So He says, have faith in God. And when you do, when you really trust Him, when you really surrender to Him completely, you can be absolutely certain that He will not fail you. There's no limit to what He can do in you to enable you to be and do everything that He has called you and created you to be and do.